After 3 straight years of solid winning football, Tulane struggled towards the end of last year, dropping a game to Memphis in the regular season, losing to Army in the Conference Championship game, and getting blown out by Florida in their bowl game. And once the offseason began, they lost huge contributors to this team. Darian Mensah, their quarterback from last year, was amazing and is now a Duke Blue Devil. Mekhi Hughes, who is one of the best running backs in the country, is now an Oregon Duck, not to mention other departures into the transfer portal or to the NFL. But this team still has a couple young guys or guys returning from last year that should be able to keep this team fairly competitive in the American Conference. And the big story now is that former BYU quarterback Jake Rutzliff is joining the program. Now, he will have to be a walk on, mandated by the circumstances of his arrival to the program, but I would expect him to be the starting quarterback early on in this season for the Green Wave, and he raises their ceiling quite a bit now. And Tulane looks like one of the front runners to make a college football playoff appearance as the group of five team. And to kick off their season, they have a pretty tough non-conference schedule. The first two games aren't as difficult, kicking it off with a home game against Northwestern. Northwestern really doesn't have a lot going for them right now. Preston Stone is transferring in from SMU after he lost the starting job early in the regular season last year to Kevin Jennings, who is obviously the starting quarterback still at SMU after their college football playoff appearance. But outside of Preston Stone, Northwestern doesn't have a ton of weapons to compete with the ones that Tulane has. Even though Mekhi Hughes has moved on, they still have a solid young running back as his replacement in Arnold Barnes III, who, despite being the RB2 last year, put up solid numbers on the ground, and I think he is more than capable of taking on that workload. They're bringing in a lot of wide receiver transfers as well. I think this Tulane offense is still going to be fairly decent. And defensively, they've lost a couple people in the secondary, but still should be a relatively strong team, especially on the defensive line. I think they should get a pretty easy win over Northwestern. Just going to be a little bit tougher because Northwestern is still a Power 4 program. And then with a road trip to South Alabama. South Alabama could have been interesting last year, but this year, with Gio Lopez now a North Carolina Tar Heel, I don't think South Alabama is going to be nearly as competitive as they could have been with Gio Lopez as their starting quarterback. So Tulane's going to start the season off 2-0, but has a tough 2 games ahead of them in the non-conference.
Yeah, and you're probably wondering why there are two percentages here. Now, the first percentage is the original percentage corresponding to the one in the other team's video. We already released videos for both Duke and Ole Miss, and at that time we only had a 20% chance for Tulane to beat Duke, 10% for Ole Miss. In order to keep our predictions accurate, we aren't able to change those despite new information, but this 35% chance next to the 20 is what we think Tulane has now that we know they have Jake Retzliff. And the 25% for Ole Miss, same thing. Now they have Retzliff. That has increased their chances by about 15%, we believe, in both of those games. The Duke game is going to be very interesting as well because Duke's starting quarterback is Darian Mensah, the quarterback from Tulane last season. Got paid some big bucks to transfer over to the Blue Devils, and I think Duke's going to be a really solid program in the ACC this year. They're definitely one of the dark horses in that conference, along with Georgia Tech. The roster, very solid. I think they're going to have a really good offense. They should be able to compete with teams near the top of that conference, but I'd put them in more of a similar tier to SMU than I would the clear front runner in Clemson. That being said, though, I think Duke gets their revenge. Darian Mensah gets the revenge game. Then it's a road trip to Ole Miss, and the Rebels will be starting Austin Simmons for his first season as the starting quarterback. They have had Jackson Dart for the last few seasons. I think it's going to take a little while to get used to that change. And a lot of people think Ole Miss isn't going to miss a beat. I'm not sure if that's the case. I could see them losing one or two games more than the usual, 9 or 10 wins that we've seen them at the past few seasons. Ole Miss might not have as much of a chance to make the college football playoffs this year as they have the past few. I still think that they are better than Tulane. The home field advantage helps them out quite a bit. And Even though I think Jake Retzlaff is going to give Tulane a better chance in this game, the weapons around him I just don't think are going to be able to do enough against the Ole Miss defense on the road. That environment's certainly not going to be easy. Retzlaff also in these first few games is going to be learning a new offense pretty quickly. So I don't think they're going to win either of these games against Duke and Ole Miss, but they have at least a little bit better chance now that they found a better replacement for Darian Mensah.
They continue their road trip after the Ole Miss game, this time going to face Tulsa. And Tulsa is, quite honestly, one of the worst teams in college football. Don't think they got much better. The home field advantage gives them maybe a little bit more help keeping this from an 100% chance, but Tulane should be the better team in every single way. So Tulane will get back in the win column here. They have a bye week to prepare for East Carolina, and East Carolina is going to be another team that could surprise some people. Their offense is returning a lot of the production they had last year, including their starting quarterback in Katon Hauser, who put up solid stats last year, and there were two quarterbacks that were in play. So if he is the full-time starting quarterback, then East Carolina's offense should be fairly good even if they have to replace their starting running back from last year. It's kind of similar to Tulane. They had a guy who was the number two last year who also put up decent stats. But the difference here is that the defense lost a good amount of their players from last year, who was a fairly good defense. Just comparing these two teams, I think Tulane's offense will be able to exploit some of the weaknesses this East Carolina defense will have after losing so much of the production from last year. The home field advantage also adds to that. East Carolina can pull off a bit of an upset here, but I do think Tulane as a whole is the more complete team and will be more likely to win this game than the Pirates will.
Next up is Army, and this is a rematch of the AAC championship game from last season. And this one shouldn't be as difficult for Tulane this time as the Black Knights no longer have Bryson Daly at quarterback. Instead, that position will fall on the shoulders of Dwayne Coleman. And I do think he's going to do a solid job, but Bryson Daly was just on a different level. And I think because of that, Army is going to take a little bit of a step back this season. They also lost a lot of other starting players, unlike Navy, who returned a majority of their team. I think Army is going to struggle a lot more this season, and Tulane should be able to pick up a win here.
They got another bye week here to prepare for their last five games of the season. Starts with two road trips. First one being UTSA, and the Roadrunners, once again, could be in a similar boat to East Carolina. They do have their starting quarterback returning in Owen McCown, who put up very solid numbers last year, throwing for over 3,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. But the rest of the team has gotten a little bit worse. He's replacing most of his weapons from last season, and defensively, it's the same story. Their biggest playmaker last year on defense was Jamori Robinson on the D line, who had 10 and a half sacks. He was in the transfer portal. I don't remember which team he ended up signing with, but I don't remember which team he ended up committing to, but he is going to be an absolute weapon for that team and a key piece that will be missed by this Roadrunners defense. And I think that's going to be the difference in this game. Without Robinson there, I think this UTSA defense will not be able to stop the explosiveness of this Tulane offense. So this will be another win for the Green Wave here. And then probably their trickiest conference matchup of the year, a road trip to face Memphis. And the Tigers might be playing with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder as they were recently denied access to the Big 12, willing to pay $200 million to the Big 12 conference to let them join, with the stipulation that if in 5 years the Big 12 did not find it satisfactory with Memphis's contributions, that they could have kicked him out. And I think the Memphis players and this coaching staff might be playing with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, and they could make this game very interesting. They were one of the better teams in the AAC last season and will be right back where they were this season. Now, they will have to replace a good amount of their team, particularly their starting quarterback. as they're bringing in Brendan Lewis from Nevada, who was solid last year, but definitely needs to step it up a little bit to play to the standards of Memphis football. But overall, this Memphis team is still going to be fairly decent, even with the amount of players they had to replace. But at the end of the day, I'm going to trust the starting quarterback that has experience playing in big games. And if that is Jake Retzlaff this season, because we don't know if he actually is going to be the starting quarterback, considering he has a month to learn the entire playbook before the season starts. But if it is Jake Retzlaff at quarterback, then I think Tulane is going to be the superior team, even if Memphis and Tulane are similar in every other way. So Tulane gets the win here and keeps on rolling.
These last three games all should be quite a bit easier for Tulane, and it's all pretty much the same story. None of these teams were very good last season, didn't have great transfer portal classes, didn't have great recruiting classes, and didn't bring back a lot of returning production. It's honestly about as easy of an end to the season as you can ask for, only having to go on the road once as well with the trip to Temple. I would be shocked if Tulane lost any of these games, which would put them all the way up to 10-2 as their final record, which gives them a shot at making the American Conference Championship. Our way too early projection was 7.75 wins and 4.25 losses. We had Tulane going 9-3. That was before the addition of Jake Retzlaff just a few days ago. Now, the projection is up to 8.3 or 8.6 if you take the new percentages based on not having released the Duke and Ole Miss videos already, or 3.7, 3.4 losses potentially. 6.3 and 1.7 in the American Conference. The prediction is 10-2, undefeated in American play, and we think the ceiling could be as high as 11-1, maybe pulling off one upset against either Duke or Ole Miss. Now that they have Retzlaff, the Duke and Tulane game gets a lot more interesting. The Darian Mensah revenge story could be spoiled by a Jake Retzlaff-led Tulane team. The floor going to be 8-4. There's a few teams in the American that could potentially beat Tulane. Some of those maybe Army, definitely Memphis could, ECU could. There's a couple games that should be pretty close that Tulane could potentially drop and go to 8-4. But we think that they can go 10-2 this season. Might be tough to make a college football playoff berth with that. It'll depend on the rest of the group of five. So make sure to come back and watch our other videos so you can find out whether or not Tulane has a good enough chance to make the college football playoffs. And we'll see you in the next one.